Hello and welcome to the Gaggle What We Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. And today we're very fortunate to welcome Ray McGovern, who, of course, needs no introduction to Gagglers. He's, of course, a well-known commentator, a former intelligence analyst, and his insights into geopolitics, foreign policy, and intelligence are second to none. And since we are talking about intelligence, Ray, really in the last couple of days, we have seen the most virulent return of Russiagate. We were expecting it to be a little bit further down the line, but early September already, Russiagate has come back. So we've had the sanctions now imposed on RT and Sputnik. We've now had the arrest warrant issued for Dmitry Simes, kind of a distinguished commentator, a raid on Scott Ritter's home. So what do you think is going on here, and what else can we expect before November the 5th?
Well, George and Peter, I need to be very careful here not to become indicted for saying things that may be true, but parallel things that Russians are saying. So,
yeah, that goes under the category of malinformation, apparently, these days.
I've been joking with my friends lately, and I've been saying that the DNR, the do not resuscitate sign, was pinned onto the Russiagate bed, but by God, somebody raised it from the dead or resuscitated it without permission. Well, with plenty of permission from those who stand to benefit from making Russia the victim again and to sort of blacken what's going on. So what we have here, in my view, is a desperate attempt to silence people who might be telling the truth, but that truth is unwelcome. And when you have extreme measures, like raiding the house of one of the best analysts, Scott Ritter, and then indicting Dmitry Simes, as I understand, he's been indicted now. Plus his house been searched for the last 3 or 4 days. That's specs of desperate measures.
I think his wife has also been indicted, if I'm not mistaken.
I think she has. You're right. She has been. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, I think that has to do with their violating the sanctions. Other people have to worry about the Foreign Agent Registration Act, like that's Scott Ritter and others who have been indicted. Witness what Attorney General Merrick Garland said the other day. From Americans' point of view, it seems very sad that the Attorney General, the chief law enforcement of our country, is involved in this thing. Whether he is compass mentis enough to realize that he's been dragged into this or not, I don't know. It's hard to know whether there's sanity going around much in Washington at all. But RT's response when it knew that it was going to be fingered and charged with these things was ha ha ha, and then down the line they said something like there are only 3 things in the world that you can depend on, and that is death, taxes, and RT involvement in interference in the U.S. election. Meanwhile, you have President Putin himself. Well, I was going to say uncharacteristically, but lately he's become a little bit too, well, not maybe too, but he's become very uncharacteristically flippant and humorous in some ways. And he can't stand what he sees as the spectacle in Washington without some humor and without some contribution. Now, I'm going to say something that will be welcome to the people who might be listening in here. Putin is guilty as sin in causing confusion with respect to the U.S. election. I mean, 2 days ago, our Attorney General said that the Russians were favoring Trump. That's the whole idea here. And yesterday, Putin said, no, no, no. Biden was on hand. And when Biden was removed, well, he told us to support Kamala Harris. And well, of course, that's what we're doing. We'll continue to do that. Well,
And apparently he has appreciation for Kamala Harris's chuckle as well.
Yes.
Yeah, that one said, yeah, he was quite infectious
laughter. Yes.
So my bottom line here is that here's Putin out in the Far East doing significant things, not even worrying much about what happens in Ukraine, because I think he believes that he's got that in hand. I hate to disagree with the director of national intelligence, but she said in late January 2002, what is it, 2022? Was it 2024 now, right? So she said that the Russians were running out of ammunition in Ukraine, and they had no indigenous capability to replace the weaponry that has already been destroyed. So they're in sorry straits.
Cannibalizing washing machines for parts.
Well, she didn't say that, but others have said that, right? But that's bad enough. She said that in public. I imagine that's the kind of advice you were giving Biden. And after all, she is the director of national intelligence, which means that she runs the president's daily brief. She runs what's left of the analytic component that produces national intelligence estimates, if there are any anymore. And so she's a key figure. And so who did Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, appeal to as knowing that the Russians were preferring Trump? The Director of National Intelligence, who has never been wrong in the past, So how do they know? Well, Putin had a little fun yesterday, as you know, and they said, well, we're supporting Kamala. So put that in your pipe and smoke it, So
I'm not sure why the FBI is, I'm sorry, the DOJ is involved in adjudicating what is true and not true, but we'll leave that aside here. Ray, you came out with an article just recently in consortiumnews.com, conditioning Americans for war with Russia. And now, I mean, I think the three of us in our audience understand that Russiagate has a domestic political component to it, and it's primarily that. But there's something that George and I have observed from the very beginning. What stays in the United States when it comes to Russiagate doesn't stay in the United States. It bleeds into policy, and I think that's really the essence of your article. I mean, you can whip up all of this artificial hysteria, but it does influence policy at the end.
It does. More important, actually, it influences the whole body politic. In other words, some of my best friends, college roommates from New York, they read the New York Times still, and they believe what's in the New York Times. And nothing I can say. And my very best friend said to me 2 years ago, look, Ray, I don't want to hear anything more about this Putin person that you're talking about. I can't believe anything you say anymore. And I said, why? Well, we watch Rachel Maddow and we think she's the greatest, Well, this is a very sophisticated, well-educated person who can't wrap his mind around the fact that Rachel Maddow has been wrong so many times and has such a slant on things that she is literally incredible. She's incredibly incredible. So that's what you run into. Now, what's my point? My point is that if you brainwash, now my editors think brainwash is a little too strong. Mitt Romney, or not Mitt Romney, but George Romney, his dad, got in real trouble for using that term, right? When he came back from Vietnam and he said, my God, I've been brainwashed. Well, that was the end of his candidacy for president. I don't have to worry about that, but still, my editors say, no, it's interference. It's conditioning the American people for another war. My God. as we traced Russiagate from the very beginning, I will say this. Most people don't realize that the falsity of the charge that Russia hacked into the DNC computers and gave those emails to WikiLeaks, we could prove that, and did, on December the 12th, 2016. All right. So this was before Trump ever even took office, right? How did we prove that? Well, we had technical experts, actually former technical directors from the National Security Agency that knew chapter and verse, had created the programs that allow NSA to intercept just about everything. And I said, Bill Binney is the main fellow. I said, Bill, come on. Intercept everything. Come on. He says, Ray, they can do it. It's possible. The technology allows it, and they do it. Now, they don't read everything or listen to everything right away, but they store it away under Ray McGovern, and anytime they want to use it, okay? So what they did was two technical directors and a couple of the others of us wrote a memo which said, look, we've looked at the technology here, part of which we created, and then we've exploited what Ed Snowden brought out into Hong Kong. Well, those charts, those graphs, they're incredible. We included those in the article. Bob Perry was still around, and we put these little things in, and we said, look, it's impossible. They couldn't have hacked. Okay, if there was a hack, we would know it. So at NSA, they wouldn't have to say allegedly, or maybe we assess. We say according to. Okay, so that was December 12th, 2016. Later, almost a year later, December 5th, 2017, there was court testimony by the head of CrowdStrike. Fellow's name is Sean Henry. He was an old clone of Bob Mueller when he was head of the FBI. He worked for him for, I think, 15 years as his chief techie guy, right? So then he founds his own little special thing called CrowdStrike. And they leave it to him to look into the forensics of, how did the DNC, how was it hacked by Russia? And that's the first question that Adam Schiff of the House Intelligence Committee asks Sean Henry in sworn testimony, December 5, 2017 now, okay? So a year after we wrote our memo. So Sean Henry starts to answer. Well, the Russians, and then his lawyer grabs him and says, Sean Henry says, well, actually, we have no technical information showing that the Russians hacked.
What did the lawyer say? You're under oath? Do you think that's what you said to him? You're under oath.
I couldn't hear it, but yeah. So he says there's no technical evidence, and there's some circumstantial evidence that we did. This is the way the Russians do things. They went so there it was. December 5th, 2017. Now, there was a change in administrations a couple of weeks later, and the new head of the old head became the new head. His name was Adam Schiff. What did he do with that testimony? Oh, well, it was not confidential, but he made it private confidential. He put it in the bottom of his safe, and only he had the combination, right? For 2.5 years. Okay. Yeah. Now, finally.
Yeah, but I'm sorry to interrupt, Ray, but there were Republicans on that committee that were aware of that, and they kept quiet during that time.
They were all aware of it. That was just so corrupt. Some of the questions, anyhow, everybody kept quiet about it. They're afraid. If the deep state will come after them somehow or other if they do things that the deep state doesn't like. Anyhow, long story short. After 2.5 years, Trump says, we really ought to get that testimony released because, here the Russia hack thing, it shows that whether. So one of his advisors says, well, you're the president. You're the president, Mr. Trump. Why don't you just tell me to order Adam Schiff to release that testimony, or I'm going to release it that day. You can authorize me to release it. I mean, it's hardly even classified. So that's what the new director of national intelligence at the time, he calls up Schiff and he says, look, okay, tomorrow, I release this or you do. So Schiff releases it, right? But he releases it in a bevy of 58 other documents so that it's very easy for the New York Times and Washington Post to miss it, completely miss it. What was that date? May 7th, 2020. Okay. Whoa. Okay. How long ago was that? Do the math. Okay. The New York Times, Washington Post has kept that under wraps, just as Adam Schiff did for 2.5 years before. So, long story short, the Americans don't know what's going on. And so Russiagate resuscitated is just a continuation of Russiagate 1.
But Ray, I mean, what's important what you said about 2020, because 2020, Russiagate is revived to interfere in the 2020 election. So this is really Russiagate 3.0. This is now the third consecutive election for Russiagate. When they knew about Hunter Biden's laptop, the FBI had that. They had it since December 2019, kept it under wraps, and then warned Zuckerberg, knowing that this is all that this was a genuine laptop. They warned Zuckerberg, saying, you know, the Russians, they're up to something. They could well dump something on you. You better be very wary of what the Russians are going to come up with.
That's exactly right. So, so number one, that testimony was suppressed, still suppressed. As a matter of fact, we had trouble finding a link to it. It's changed 3 times. Okay, we still have a valid link. It's in my article. Okay, but then, as you point out, with the election coming in 2020, there was trouble deep. My God. Let me give you an example of how these things run, because I know chapter and verse about this, because I know these guys I know the system. What happened was Hunter Biden's laptop were in a, well, I don't know, he forgot that he gave it to be repaired. And when the fellow the repairman looked at it, he my God, you better give this to the FBI. It's all, shows all kinds of illegal activity, including, it looks like some bribery by not only Hunter, but Daddy himself, but give it to the FBI. So he gave it to the FBI. The FBI, what did it do? Well, it did the same thing that it did with Seth Rich's laptop. Mum's the word, right? Okay. But this repairman gives it also to some Republicans, and the New York Post comes out and says, my God, this is terrible. And so what happens to New York Post? It's knocked off Twitter. It's not, you can't get the Washington Post unless you buy it for, it's not 5 cents anymore, is it? Well, you buy it at the newsstand, right? So that's what happened, but it was worse than that, because there was enough going on in the open media that Tony Blinken thought that he really needed to help Joe Biden. Tony Blinken, of course, has been his Tonto for his alter ego for centuries. Seems so. So what did he do? And this is really interesting, and there's a point to this. Tony Blinken calls up his old friend Mikey Morrell. Now, Mikey Morrell, you probably remember him. He's going to kill Russians. He's going to kill Russians. He was actually acting director of the CIA for a while, right? So he says, Mikey, can you help it? Can you help us out here? The next debate, the last debate is coming. Hunter's laptop is bound to come up. Hey, do you think I'd get a handful of former high directors of national intelligence or CIA to say that it was say it was a Russian disinformation intelligence operation? Do you think you could do that, Mikey? No problem. I can get more than 5. 2 days later, 50 former directors of the CIA and so forth come forth with a statement, official statement published in Politico, which says this has all the earmarks, Hunter's laptop, of a Russian intelligence disinformation operation. Oh, that the major media paid that real big.
Do you believe, let's just be clear for everyone here, do you believe that any of those individuals that made that claim actually saw the laptop or its contents?
Well, not only that, Peter, but they knew that the FBI had it, All they had to do was call up the FBI and say, "Hey, we've been asked to say this was a Russian intelligence disinformation operation. What do have you seen? What do you, is that right?" They didn't do
Well,
that.
Ray, I mean, all of these individuals took an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. Did they, what they did, is there any breaking of the law or breaking of trust? I mean, what I'm saying is that, you know, who is held responsible for this fiction that they generated? Or you can't.
That's the point of the story. No one is held responsible, and that's why precisely why they think they can do all this. But just to finish how this played out, so they issued that statement about a week before the last debate, and Trump, still not wise after 3.5 years, still not wise to the ways of Washington, says to Mr. Biden, "Hey, Mr. Biden, what about that laptop that shows that you and Hunter were getting bribes from the Chinese or from from the Ukraine? Come on, what about that?" And Biden, fully prepared by his people, says, "Mr. Trump, haven't you heard that 50, 51 actually, because Mikey Merle asked to add his own name, 51 former intelligence leaders said that's a Russian intelligence disinformation operation." Haven't you heard that? Trump was stumped. And well, I don't know if that turned the election, but it certainly didn't help. It didn't help
Well, I
Trump
mean,
at all.
I'll let George jump in here, but
Yeah.
that's why George and I, through the ages now, we never used the S word, they stolen, but we used the R word, rigged. Okay, and I think that works under that rubric. Go ahead, George.
Yeah, but what's also interesting about what Biden said is that he actually lied because he mischaracterized what those intelligence people said. They said it had all the earmarks of a Russian disinformation operation. They didn't actually say it was a Russian disinformation operation. What Biden said was that, oh, they said that this was a Russian disinformation operation. So that was never said. You know, they were careful just to say, well, all the indications are that it's a Russian disinformation operation. But he went a step further and said it was a Russian disinformation operation. But just going back now to 2024, this seems to be a little different. I mean, obviously they've got Trump in the crosshairs, but there's an attack here on these influencers, these internet influencers, who are obviously they're trying to discredit them through this association with Russia. And then you have to wonder, I mean, again, you're the intelligence expert. They had to have been monitoring this for some time. So, you know, the wire transfers and everything. So was this a case of that they waited till just the day after Labor Day before they lowered the boom with this disclosure about these, you know, these wire transfers into these internet influencers, and they, you know, basically provided all the clues as to who these internet influencers are. So you think this is something that they'd known about for some time before they lowered the boom?
Well, with that they known about, well, that they planned, that
Right,
they
yeah,
wanted
but
to
that they'd already
construct.
know,
Yeah,
yeah, that they know that there's something, there's this thing, this
yeah,
Tenet Media and
yeah,
this
yeah,
whole operation and the wire transfers and the money that was
yeah.
given to these internet influencers, that they'd known about this and then waited until after Labor Day before they disclosed this.
Before they made it public. Yeah,
Exactly.
I think you're right, George. You haven't lost your touch. You know as much about the U.S. Machinations as others. I would point out that there was a sort of we call a warm-up band, for the main event for the Merrick Garland, Christopher Wray, Attorney General, FBI chief event there 2 days ago, and that was this fellow who wrote Russian Roulette, a fellow named Michael Isikoff. Okay, he's been the main promoter of this thing, and he raised his head on this thing about 6 months ago. I wrote about it then, and then actually 10 days ago, he was doing it again. He was giving his friend, what's his name, Jeff Stein, who runs a thing called Spycraft, right? He's giving him interviews and he's telling them the Russian hacked the DNC and the Russians had to do this. So he's at it already. So it's sort of the warm-up band for the big event 2 days ago. And, you know, he's the guy that's promoted the P tape, you know, prostitutes urinating on the president, on Donald Trump, who wasn't president yet, and the whole business about the Steele dossier. That was the feature of Russian roulette. Now, what was really interesting is that in an interview with a very friendly interviewer, whom he shocked, Isikoff owned up to the fact that, well, no, that was probably not true, all that stuff. And the interviewer said, wait, it wasn't true? No, it's probably not true. Now, that was just a couple of weeks after May 7th, 2020, when that testimony was released. So someone on the committee gave Isikoff the heads up, oh, this testimony is going to be released, that there was no Russian hacking and so forth. So you might want to do a little preemptive thing here and sort of make what under Nixon was called a modified limited hangout, right? You say, oh, no, it wasn't, probably not true now. Anyhow, I looked at the Isikoff and I wrote 10 days ago about all this. And with all the Middle East stuff there, Joe Lauria, the terrific consortium news guy, says, well, Ray, okay, I'm going to get to that, and was ready to be printed when Merrick Garland and Christopher Wray announced they were going to have this hearing. So I said, oh, bummer, because, you know, this would have been a really nice prelude to that. But then Joe and I put together this most recent consortium news thing where we could incorporate what was said and call it what it is, you know, Quatsch in German, Yerunda in Russian, you know, just, you know, so things worked out pretty well because we gave chapter and verse to this thing, and we looked a little bit more about what Isikoff was saying. Of course, he's preparing the American people for war, wider war in Ukraine, and he's quoting one of the former U.S. ambassadors, one of those people that we are going to use an adjective there, one of those people we had there in Moscow. So it's pretty sinister because you know, people kept asking me, and Peter, you're quite aware of this because you had me in many times, Ray, why the hell are you so obsessed with this Russiagate stuff, you know? And I'd say, one radio guy I tried to bring along on this. He says, I don't understand, Ray. And I said, well, here's the answer. Russia has nuclear weapons. And he says, oh, okay. Well, that is the answer. For God's sake. It's never been
Well,
so.
I'd like to point out to everyone that I think it's no secret, Ray, that you are retired. You don't have to do this. You know, that's why I admire people like you so much. Is you don't have to do this, okay? But you go down the path that very few will go down because they're fearful of their careers and their reputations. They're not particularly interested in the truth. Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit here. It's part of all of this. You've already mentioned it at the tail end of your last answer about the situation that's going on in Ukraine. I don't really want to go into the minutia of it here, but you know, one of the things I've noticed, and I'm going to parse my words here a little bit. George will know what I'm talking about. I call it last legism. Ukraine is on its last legs. Okay. Well, I was tired of it the first time I heard, and I'm still tired of it here. The problem I see here is this has, first of all, this conflict in Ukraine, unfortunately for, you know, the Ukrainian people, soldiers, and Russian soldiers also, is a conflict that never should have happened. But it has happened, and we are here where we are. And I would posit to our viewers is that, you know, Ukraine may or may not be on its last leg, but NATO is not on its last leg. And I think that is the prism in which we should be looking at this, not through the horrific losses that the Ukrainians are experiencing, but what NATO is going to do about it. And at this point in time, and now it is September 6, 2024, I throw it to both of you. NATO is nowhere near calling quits. Go ahead, Ray.
Well, Peter, you will no doubt agree that NATO really is the US.
Right.
And everything depends on the next 2 months, in my view. It's exactly 2 months when we'll know who's going to be the next president. My God. So, given the fact that Ukraine is not doing so well, what are these? I have to be really careful about my adjectives, don't I? What are these people in the White House, or people like Jacob Sullivan and Tony Blinken? What are they likely to do in these next 2 months? Think of the stakes for them, okay? I mean, it's not kind of a patriotic sort of thing. These guys could end up in jail if that other fellow comes in to be president. Why? Well, nobody knows the story about Blinken, but the episode that I just recounted with respect to Hunter Biden's laptop, I mean, Blinken set that thing in motion. Blinken was largely responsible for that not hurting Joe Biden. So is that illegal? Was that, it's that kind of thing. And also, of course, Blinken's been saying things that didn't turn out to be true. So he's vulnerable. Now, Jacob Sullivan, I mean, he was the intellectual author, if that's the correct word, of Russiagate. Way back in 2016 when Hillary Clinton knew that Julian Assange had those emails, because Julian Assange announced on June 15th, 2016, we have emails pertaining to Hillary Clinton and we're going to release them soon. I mean, she knew that could really damage her campaign. Why? For your listeners, because it showed that Bernie Sanders didn't have the chance of a snowball in hell of getting to be the candidate of the Democratic Party. The deck was so stacked against him. So what did she do? She said, my God, what are we going to do? And she had this bright light, Jacob Sullivan, a main advisor there. And he come up now, I don't have hard evidence of that, but he's the type of guy who said, I know what we'll do. We'll blame it on the Russians. Hillary. But it wasn't the Russians. It was WikiLeaks. Now, that's okay. We hate WikiLeaks, so we got a twofer. Okay, we blame it on the Russians. We blame it on WikiLeaks, and we say this is this is what the Russians are trying to do, and they're trying to help Trump. That'll work really good. Okay, well, it did work really good, but not really good enough, if I can put it that way. So he was the guy that said, "Listen, what we're going to do," and they started that 3 days after those emails were released by Julian Assange, just as the Democratic National Committee was beginning, National Convention was beginning. And it played really well. Unfortunately, it didn't play well enough for Hillary to win. And when you look at the irregularities, and that's a nice word to use, the unlawful stuff that the head of the FBI, the head of the CIA, Justice Department officials galore, NSA, what they all did. I mean, how do you explain the fact that they would take such liberties with the law? Well, it's very easy. James Comey, then director of the FBI, wrote a book, and he said, quote, I was operating in an environment in which it was sure that Hillary Rodham Clinton would be the next president of the United States, period. Well, you're operating in that kind of environment, you can take all kinds of liberties with the law because nobody's going to indict you. Nobody's going to find out. I mean, you're going to promote it. You get to be attorney general, for God's sake. So that's how it went down. It was so sinister and so irregular. So what's the point? These guys now have a personal stake in avoiding a loss in Ukraine, a definitive loss, a loss in the election, and then possible loss of their freedom. I mean, if this other fella is pretty vindictive, and does he have reason to be vindictive? Well, I'm no fan. I don't think Donald Trump is a good person or a good candidate. I'm no fan of Donald Trump. But the truth is the truth, for God's sake. And the truth in this case is on his side. He was defamed, he was emasculated, he was prevented from doing anything he wanted in terms of creating a decent relationship with Russia. And that's big. And now things are playing out so that these guys not only have a personal stake, but they're looking at this. How are we gonna prevent Trump from going forward to the Dnieper River? I mean, prevent Putin from going forward to the Dnieper River, which he can do now within the next couple of weeks. I mean, he could do that if he wants. Okay, how do we prevent him from killing all those thousands of Ukrainian troops left in Kursk? Okay, and how do we avoid all this? Well, I don't know, but last time this came up, this kind of situation, when President Biden was still sort of talking to these people, and he said, "Okay, now the Ukrainians want some more 155 millimeter shells. Give it to them." And Secretary of Defense Austin said, "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. President, but we don't have any. We don't have any more." Oh, NATO give them. Well, we check with data. They don't have any more. We don't have anything. Why not? The true answer, which they probably didn't give, is we didn't expect the Russians to do anything. I mean, there were no threat when they fell apart, so we didn't build up rudimentary. I trained on 155 millimeter shells. I mean, in 155 howitzers, 105 artillery pieces. That's why I can't hear real well. It's a din that they create. Anyhow, so the bottom line here is that the Russians were never expected to do anything because they didn't really expect it. So that's why they're not. Anyhow, long story short, he says, "Well, what else you got up on the shelf?" Well, we have these cluster munitions, Mr. President, but most countries ban those, and they're really pretty. Yeah. So, well, do they work? Yeah. Well, use them. So they cluster. Okay. So what's the analogy here? This time, they're probably out of cluster munitions. They haven't turned the tide. What do we got? What else we got on the shelf? Oh, on the top shelf with the combination lock. Those are the low yield nuclear weapons. They're hardly as big as the ones in Hiroshima or Nagasaki, Mr. President. And we could use one of those. That would show the world who's in charge here, and maybe prevent what's otherwise going to happen in Ukraine. Now, McGovern hears himself saying that, and he says to himself, "That's pretty extreme, Ray. Do you really? Do I put that beyond these guys? I do not, and that has the hair sticking up on the end of my neck here." And I think that's precisely why the Russians are saying, "Look, please remember, we have low yield nuclear weapons too. We got more of them. We got different kinds, and you don't want to do this, okay? This is in my view, it's a preventive. It's kind of a deterrent thing. Look, you guys try this stuff in Europe. We're gonna have to maybe retaliate."
Well, but that's one of the big problems here is that deterrence works when both sides believe in it. But if one side stops believing in it, then you go into this nightmare situation. Go ahead, George.
No, but I think that's really the problem. I mean, deterrence worked during the Cold War because both sides said, well, we don't even want to go down the path of taking small steps and then bigger steps and bigger steps. We just don't even want to take the first small step because, we don't want the total global nuclear annihilation. But what has happened is that NATO no longer believes in deterrence because NATO has convinced itself, look, Russia's not going to go nuclear. They're not going to do it. They can bluster, they can talk, oh yeah, you're playing with matches and whatever, but Russia ultimately is going to do nothing. And that has been the assumption under which NATO has been operating. It's very dangerous, but essentially it's what Peter said. Deterrence isn't working if people are saying, look, I don't really believe him. I don't believe he's going to go nuclear. So therefore we can go on doing this, provoking Russia, because ultimately they're just not going to do it.
George, you're right, as usual. Deterrence depends on both parties. Let me give a little historical perspective here. This is the second time that this has happened in history, in my history. I was a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army at Fort Benning when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, okay? Now, here's a little insight. We came down there, hotshot lieutenants, eager to test out these new grenade launchers just invented, you know, not only 155 millimeter howitzers and 105, but the whole array of things. And there were no weapons at Fort Benning at the Army Infantry Training Center. No, callow youth that I was, I went to a sergeant. I said, "This seems a little odd, Sergeant. How come there are no weapons that we could train on here?" And he said, "Oh, well, 2 divisions came through here 2 weeks ago. They're all in Key West. They're ready to go into Cuba." My God, all right? So now what happened during Cuba? It was necessary for the country that did something really stupid to back down, and that was Russia, okay? It was necessary to talk to Russia. Kennedy talked to Khrushchev. Bobby Kennedy talked to Dobrynin. There were talks. They said, you know, do we really want to destroy the world? No, we don't want to do that. So let's work it. On the side, Bobby Kennedy did this little thing about Turkey. We'll remove those, but don't say anything about that. We'll do that, and we promise to do that, and we fulfill that promise. Okay. So what's the long story short here? Long story short is that just 5 or 6 months later, on June 10th, 2003, 1963. Okay, I had been a CIA analyst for 3 months. Okay, John Kennedy got up at American University and said, "Look, we want the same things for our children. Every country has good aspects as well as bad aspects. The most important thing ever is to make sure that with 2 nuclear superpowers, that one never faces the other with a choice between humiliating retreat and using those damn things, okay? Well, since 1963, we avoided that until now, okay? And how did it happen now? Well, we got involved in a war against Russia, openly advertised as trying to weaken Russia. People talk about dismembering Russia. Well, you know, that's what we did with respect to Ukraine. We were warned by John Mearsheimer 10 years ago, and what would happen if we did that, but we did it anyway. So that was the precedent-breaking thing. We threatened, okay, the Russians. Now, kind of do a little reverse here. Who is threatened with the choice between humiliating retreat and using nuclear weapons? Well, the Russians don't have to use nuclear weapons, for God's sake. They're in the catbird seat. They have all kinds of options, not only toward the Dnieper, but also in Kursk, for God's sake, where they're going to eliminate all. So who's faced with that choice between a humiliating? Well, it's Blinken and Sullivan, for God's sake. Now, the way this worked out, this is not what Russia intended, in my view, but there it is. And the Russians look at this and they say, "My God, we better try to remind these guys overtly. Look, we not only have low-yield nuclear weapons, we're exercising them. Actually, we have some in Belarus. Actually, we've done joint exercises with Belarus. For God's sake, don't even think of it. Why are the Russians doing all this?"
Well, I mean, see, but that begs the question, right? And this is what's so problematic about it. I'm glad you brought up the Cuban Missile Crisis, because the hotheads didn't prevail. I mean, there were people that said, "Look, let's talk. We can do it behind the scenes. We can do it clandestinely. You know, talk." I don't see anything like that now. And in talking about humiliating defeat, well, I I think NATO is facing that, but they don't have to accept it. And that's the problem. I mean, how do you avoid a humiliating defeat? And we're getting into this area that for our lifetimes, up until recently, was always called the unthinkable. You don't go there, okay? But you're suggesting, and I'm agreeing with you, that they will go there.
They being the U.S. or NATO.
The U.S. and NATO, yeah.
Yeah. Well, again, it's hard for me to believe myself saying that, and you saying that, Peter. But I've spent like the last half century trying to put myself in the shoes of Kremlin leaders, and Putin himself may have trouble believing that, but his generals don't. Military intelligence has to do with capabilities, not intentions. And Putin has the same generals looking over his shoulder that Khrushchev did back in 1962. After all, the survival of the Soviet state is in play here. And so what I'm saying here is that some pundits say, well, the Russians are threatening a strike against Washington or against New York. Okay, no, they're not doing that. Okay, that would be suicide. It's still suicide if they try to do. What are they trying to do? Well, they're trying to warn the Europeans. Look, you guys, look what happened to Ukraine. God, do you want that to happen and worse to you? I mean, look, we have this capability. If anybody thinks about mini nukes, we got them galore, and we can use them. So please realize you're being had. Okay, witness the fact that those sycophants in Germany have agreed to emplace U.S. ballistic missiles in Germany starting in 2026.
Many of our viewers are not old enough, but all three of us right here remember very well when that happened in the 1980s.
That's right. And they don't remember that Gorbachev, who came into power during the 1980s, said to Ronald Reagan, after they had built up a modicum of trust, he said, Mr. President, we have these ICBMs and they can hit each other for 25, 35 minutes. Why do we need these damn intermediate range, smaller range ballistic missiles? We have SS-20s. You have Pershing 2. Why don't we destroy them? They're in place. They're ready to go. But why don't we destroy them? Now, Reagan came to us and others and say, could he be serious? And we said, sounds strange. Why don't we try it? A treaty was arranged, 1987. Okay, signed by Reagan and Gorbachev. And it called for the first time in history the destruction of a whole class of missiles armed with nuclear warheads. And so the warning time went up from 10 minutes with these intermediate range to the old ICBM. Now they're good enough for deterrent. Okay, so that happened. Now what happened with that? Well, 32 years later, Mr. Trump said, well, yeah, we don't need that. We get out of that because we'd like to do this again. But they didn't do much until just recently, now they're saying in conjunction with the NATO summit in Washington back a couple of months ago, they couldn't get NATO to agree to this, but they browbeat the Germans. They said, Scholz, this is what we're going to do. And Scholz said, what?
You could blow up their pipeline. Why not this? Okay.
Yeah, you didn't object to them. But the thing is, that agreement, the title of that agreement talks about long-range ballistic missiles. Now, everybody's talking about intermediate and short range, like the INF prohibited. But the title of the thing says long-range ballistic missiles, and that's in the text as well. So why does Germany need to host U.S. long-range nuclear missiles against? I mean, it makes no sense at all. In any case, when Scholz was asked about this, what about that? He says, well, the Americans decided to do this, and we agreed. God. So that's what you have in Europe. So when we talk about NATO, well, it's been led by a fellow who Stoltenberg, okay, who used to be president of Norway, and suffice it to say that Mr. Putin was quoted 3 or 4 months ago as saying, Stoltenberg, yeah, I remember dealing with him when he was president of Norway. There was no sign of dementia then. Yeah, Stoltenberg, by the way, in a major faux pas before the European Union, September of last year, I think it was, he says, look, the Russians didn't want expansion of NATO. And that's what they got. Sweden, Finland, they said, if you try to get Ukraine in NATO, we will have to invade. Okay. Now we said no. And so they invaded Ukraine, and we got Finland and Sweden there too. I mean, what kind of dunderhead? I mean, already
Well, obviously,
500,000 Ukrainian youth killed, and he's
Yeah.
bragging about Sweden and Finland. I mean,
Sure.
so he let the cat out of the bag, didn't he?
That's right. Stoltenberg also let the cat out of the bag when he said that we have been in Ukraine since 2014. We have been building up our forces. We've been training them. We've been deploying our arms. That's what started it. And said, well, Putin issued an ultimatum in December. He said that the NATO expansion. Well, we told him no, and he invaded Ukraine. That's right. So it was nothing.
And his focus is on Finland and Sweden, right?
That's right.
He's got a major war in Ukraine where most people think about 500,000, the flower of Ukrainian youth has already perished. For what? So I've never seen it quite so strange.
There is a way out here. The problem is I don't know how to get there, and this way out is something that NATO and the United States has to accept. I don't know how they finesse it, but there is a solution to this crisis, and it was proposed in December 2021 in documents sent to NATO and to Washington about dealing with Russia's security interests and demands in Europe. Ray, eventually, one way or another, that's exactly where we're going to end up. We're going to end up talking about exactly the same things that were in those docs. You can call it an ultimatum, you can call it a suggestion, you can call it whatever you want, but it's in black and white what Russia wanted before even all of this happened. Ladies and gentlemen, my two esteemed friends here, those things are still in play. Nothing has changed. Ray.
That's right. And, if you know geography, if you know anything about military equities here, I'm fond of going back to 2015 when President Obama was resisting everyone trying to put offensive weapons in Ukraine, right? So Angela Merkel, the head chancellor of Germany, comes to Washington for consultations, and there's a press conference after her visit, and Obama's asked, what about offensive arms? Everybody's pressing for that gift to Ukraine. And Obama says, well, and Angela Merkel says, eine schlechte Idee. Before Obama, it's just a lousy idea, right? And so that he said, well, we have that under advisement. We're farming that out. And she says again, so that's 2015. Why was it eine schlechte Idee? Well, Obama spelled it out. He said, look, each country has core interests. We got to be really careful of what we consider core interests. We have no core interest in Ukraine. The Russians, on the other hand, do. Besides that, the worst thing we can give the Ukrainians is the impression that they could prevail against the Russia on their border much stronger by many, many measures. So let's not deceive the Ukrainians to think that they can prevail against a much stronger Russia. And then the Deputy Secretary of State, I won't tell you who it is not right now, under Obama says, yep, the president is of course right, because any weaponry we give to Ukraine can be matched, can be doubled, can be tripled, can be quadrupled by the Russians. Who was that Deputy Secretary of State? Do you remember?
I think it was Blinken that said that.
It's Tony Blinken.
It was Deputy Secretary, that's right, yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, everybody thought this was a trick question. Oh, no, it wasn't Victorian. Okay.
So I don't know what changed his mind, but I think it's the megalomania, the exceptionalism, the indispensable notion, which our president,
I think
President
we're
Biden.
rapidly running out of time, and maybe this is just a completely
Sure.
separate question here. But I saw Tony Blinken give a press conference yesterday. I call him the Undertaker on my program.
You call him what?
I call him the Undertaker. Okay, because he's the Undertaker of American foreign policy. He looked rattled. He looks like he has had a nervous breakdown. I mean, he is aged. He has no idea what he's talking about. Being Israel's lawyer is very, very taxing. Where do we go with that? And we can end with that question here, because it looks like there's no solution here. Only death is going to continue. And now it's moving into the West Bank.
I've been in the West Bank, as perhaps you all have. I've seen the conditions there. Just a little vignette to show you. I was with a delegation about 10 years ago. We're traveling around on the Israeli roads. They have autobahns, right? Not for the Palestinians. So we're passing by this Palestinian village at the bottom of this hill. No running water, intense poverty. You could just see it all over that little village. We go up this autobahn to the pristine alabaster settlement, Jewish settlement, run by a rabbi from Cleveland, Ohio. Okay, so we're wined and dined, and we look out the window. My God, that's beautiful grass. Oh, the sprinklers are on. Oh, they have running water up here apparently. So one of my colleagues, while this rabbi was briefing us, says, "Now, how do you explain the conditions down at the bottom of the hill there, where the Palestinians really don't have grass and don't have water and don't have sprinkling water?" And the rabbi says, "It's very easy. Deuteronomy 15:4, Yahweh promised this land to us." Now, I don't know the Hebrew scriptures as well as I know the Christian scriptures, but I did know Deuteronomy 15:4. And I said, "Rabbi, why did you only quote the first half of Deuteronomy 15:4? He said, "What do you mean? What do you mean?" I said, "You have the Bible there. Open it up. Read the whole thing." So he said, "The Lord promised us this milk, a land of milk and honey, so that there will be no poor among us." I said, "Oh, that sounds like a deal. That sounds like, well, you could call it a covenant, right? I mean, so that there be no poor among us. What about those people down the bottom?" Well, our visit was cut short at that point, so they're crazy, okay? Now, Tony Blinken, you're right. I mean, he looks disheveled. I mean, as cute as his dark suits are and his black tie, he looks like an undertaker. And, it really depends on whether we can get through the next 2 months, because I don't think whatever happens that Blinken and Sullivan are going to be around much longer. I don't know about Kamala Harris, but I think she may be powerful enough, or the Democrats may be reasonable enough to say, well, these guys have outworn their usefulness. But when he arrived in Tel Aviv, right after October the 7th last year, first thing he says, "I'm here to help." And of course, I'm Jewish, right? What does that have to do with it, for God's sake?
Well,
I mean,
Ray,
honest worker?
we can take it even further. I mean, with these polio shots, I mean, I need someone to explain to me why the majority of the people that have been killed that have been reported, over 40,000, it's much higher than that. Most of them are children, and now you want to give them polio to save their life so you can bomb them? I mean, I don't know if I would trust polio inoculations from people that want to kill you.
Well, it is very strange. As you know, the British Lancet medical journal has put the Palestinian, not Hamas, mind you, but Palestinian death toll at about, well, they say 186,000. That's, I'm not a mathematician, but that's a lot more than 40,000. And, you know, when you look at their methodology, I haven't, but John Mearsheimer has, okay?
No
Now, John
surprise.
Mearsheimer is a very well-respected dean of the realist school of political science or international relations, and he knows a lot about methodology. And he says that the methodology that the Lancet has used is sound. And John says he thinks it's between 200 and 250,000 Palestinians dead. Okay. Now, if my math is right,
That's about 10%.
there you go. Oh, you took it right out of my mouth there, Peter, as usual. I mean, it is 10%, and whether that suggests, I don't know, but it may be if it's only 5%. My God, what are we doing? Tolerating genocide. So this is not going to stick, and I do hope that the International Criminal Court will come down with those indictments. For Netanyahu and Gallant, this defense
Just
minister.
Ray, just to with then finish off with to answer Peter's question. How do you see this ending? I mean, or do you see it ending at all? I mean, is there something down the road that can just bring this to an end, or is this just going to go on and on?
Well, particularly since there has been no moral fortitude coming from out of Washington. Okay.
Well, actually, there's been a lack of moral fortitude coming out of Turkey, out of Saudi Arabia, out of Jordan, out of Egypt. It really depends on those folks whether they will stand by or be shamed into supporting the Palestinians. And my prognosis, and mind you, I'm no expert on the Middle East. My prognosis is that nothing's going to happen for the next 2 months. Nothing. The Iranians will not be cajoled into doing the kind of thing that people in Tel Aviv, people in West Jerusalem, if you will, that people in Washington would very much like them to do. The Iranians are too smart for that. The Iranians are about to conclude something that approaches a mutual defense treaty with Russia. That's going to be concluded at the BRICS meeting next month. So I don't expect anything will happen until after the U.S. election. Putin and others have already said that. You know, we got to wait, see what happens, and then, is there any hope that if this other fellow comes in with the orange hair, that he'll be any better? Oh, you know, I don't know if there's any hope. I don't have any, but so it's going to depend on whether Netanyahu is able to stick this out. He's very, very unpopular. And as I depicted Blinken and Sullivan and the rest of them there, he too has a personal stake in making sure that he doesn't lose. And people are beginning to see that. And I don't know how long he's going to be able to stay in office, but I can't be more specific than that. Those are my general readings on what's going to happen there.
Well, Ray, thank you so much, really, for giving us your time. It's really very, very generous of you. Really, we really appreciate it. I know gagglers have been crying out for, when's Ray McGovern going to appear? So thank you so much. And
you're most welcome.
Look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thank you. And if you
keep up the good work, gentlemen.
Okay, thank you. And remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. All the best. Bye-bye.